Hey everybody, it is time once again for a 2021-2022 NHL season preview. Today we're going to be looking at a team that I've talked about quite a bit this offseason because they've had a very interesting offseason and a very active offseason. They've made some big moves. They're trying to take that next step out of a rebuild and really push forward with their team and their organization and move up the standings. And we are talking about the New Jersey Devils. So before we get into it, I just ask you to please hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't. It helps the channel an absolute ton and is greatly appreciated. But let's take a look here at New Jersey. Before we look forward, we want to look back. And, last season was not a great one for the rebuilding New Jersey Devils. And this was expected. They went 19-30-7 on the year, good enough for 45 points and a 7th place finish in the East Division. The only team in the division worse than them was the league worst Buffalo Sabres. But this was expected. New Jersey was a team that still very much in a rebuild, still very, very young, definitely not filled out roster-wise. And this ended up being the kind of year that we thought we were going to see from New Jersey. What I will say, however, is that they did have stretches during the season where they really started to show that promise, where they really started to look good. And they had a few of those stretches throughout the year where it was like, you could see the potential there with the Devils. They just aren't quite there yet. They weren't quite ready to be playing like that on a nightly basis, but you could see the signs with New Jersey. But overall, it was obviously another rebuilding year. Their goal scoring, not nearly enough, just 2.59 goals for per game. Defensively, not good. Actually, like really, really bad defensively. 3.38 goals against per game. You're not going to win anything in the NHL giving up that many goals per game. Almost 3.5. That's just brutal. Their special teams were absolutely horrendous. And this is an area that needs to be addressed right now. It needs to be significantly better this coming season. Their power play operated at just 14.2% last year. That is absolutely abysmal. And their penalty kill wasn't any better. 71% on the penalty kill. That's something that there's really no excuse for. I don't care how young of a team you are, how much of a rebuild you're in. There is no excuse for having special teams this absolutely atrocious. And this is definitely an area that I'm looking at the Devils to be significantly better in this coming season. They have way too much talent to have a power play this bad. And, I mean, get some guys that can kill a penalty. I mean, 71% is horrendous. So that was last year. Last year's behind them. And the Devils have made a lot of changes. They've made some big moves this offseason. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I think we're going to see a better Devils team this year than what we saw last year. Because when we look at the additions and subtractions here, they've made some big moves. And obviously the biggest one is the addition of defenseman Dougie Hamilton. The number one D-man on the free agent market. They go out, they sign him to a massive deal, 7 years, $9 million per. Hamilton is their number one guy now. They have brought in a legitimate number one defenseman, and that is a huge move for the Devils. They also made a trade earlier in the offseason to get Ryan Graves from the Colorado Avalanche, and I think that's a really good move. Graves can kind of play on the middle pair. He can play on the bottom pair. I mean, really solid guy, good defensive play, which the Devils definitely need a lot more of after giving up over 3.3 goals per game last year. He's a pretty much, a stay-at-home defenseman who can chip in offensively, but does focus on the defensive side of things first. I think that's a really nice addition as well. And then they brought in goaltender Jonathan Bernier, who I thought was one of the best goaltenders available on the free agent market this year. I think he really has gone under the radar with how well he's played over the past few seasons because he's been on a really bad team in Detroit. And I think if Bernier can continue to play the way that he did in Detroit with New Jersey, he's going to win some more games in New Jersey, and he's going to be a really, really solid veteran guy to go along with Mackenzie Blackwood, who's presumably the starter here. I like the Bernier pickup a lot. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people with how good he is, because he played really well in Detroit, was just on a really, really bad team. I think things are going to be better with him in New Jersey, especially with the other additions that New Jersey's made, including left wing Tomas Tatar. They bring in Tatar from the Montreal Canadiens, and again, they're starting to fill this roster out a little bit. They have the young players. They have the future in place, but now you need to start bring some veterans in to kind of fill out that roster and make yourself a competitive team. That's exactly what they've done this offseason. Dougie Hamilton, Ryan Graves, Jonathan Bernier, Tomas Tatar. They are veteran players to fill out this roster and make New Jersey much more competitive than they were last year. And those were their big additions this offseason. As far as subtractions go, Ryan Murray left in free agency, so there goes a defenseman, but they pretty much replaced him with Ryan Graves, and that is an absolute upgrade for the Devils. Nathan Bastian was taken by Seattle in the expansion draft, and that definitely hurts a little bit. Bastian, I really like his game a lot. He's a solid bottom six forward who can play physically, can chip in offensively, and bring some bite to the game, bring some grit to the lineup. They're going to miss him without a doubt. But he's off in Seattle now. Will Butcher is now in Buffalo. Aaron Dell left. I believe Dell's in Buffalo too. Brett Seney, he's a depth guy that's gone. And Mikhail Maltsev is gone as well, another depth forward. He was traded to Colorado in the Graves deal. So no real huge losses for New Jersey. They did lose some guys, but most of them were depth losses, whereas their additions were major additions, like big lineup-changing additions. So I would say that they've definitely added a lot more than they've lost this offseason as far as impact on the lineup, and they should be a better team this coming year. So now it's time to take a look at my projected roster for the New Jersey Devils. And this is just my roster projection based on what we know right now. Obviously, things can still change before the start of the season. But up front, you've obviously got Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Tomas Tatar, Andreas Janssen, Miles Wood, Pavel Zacha, Jesper Bratt, Yegor Sharangovich, Yanni Kuokkanen, Michael McLeod, Jesper Boquist, Marian Studenik, I guess right now would probably be looking for an everyday spot in that lineup. And I think Nolan Foote has a really good shot to make this team. Obviously, he came over in the deal that sent Blake Coleman to Tampa Bay. Nolan Foote's a little bit older now. He's had some AHL experience. He has a good shot, I think, to make this team out of camp if he continues to develop at the rate that he should be. And, guys like Sharangovich and Kuokkanen, I mean, they really solidified their spots last year. Michael McLeod, I thought, fit in really well as a fourth-line center. Another guy that brings some grit and tenacity and chip on his shoulder to the game. And I think a guy like Michael McLeod is going to soften the blow of losing a guy like Nathan Bastian, because McLeod plays a very similar style game, as does Miles Wood. And that was actually a line for a while last year, was Miles Wood, Michael McLeod, and Nathan Bastian. Very physical line that I really liked a lot. I think McLeod is definitely going to be staying in this lineup. Defensively, we've got Dougie Hamilton, Ty Smith, PK Subban, Ryan Graves, Damon Severson, Jonas Siegenthaler, and I guess the seventh defenseman would be Christian Jaros as of right now. But that could, he could potentially, I guess, get beaten out. But I think he's likely, looking at their roster, going to be the number 7. And then in goal, obviously, we have the duo of Mackenzie Blackwood and Jonathan Bernier. I think Bernier is a really underrated goalie. He's played great in Detroit the past couple of years and really didn't get any recognition for it because he didn't win a lot of games. But his individual performance was quite good. And I think he's going to be a great veteran to go along with Blackwood, who is certainly the starter. And then as far as depth goes, this is interesting because I'm not sure if New Jersey is going to push along some of their younger guys like an Alexander Holt or a Dawson Mercer and kind of push them into an NHL spot, or if they're going to kind of go, we're not there yet, we're not going to rush these guys, give them another year, and then maybe 22, 23 would be more their years. So, I mean, if you're pushing those guys into the NHL, and they're both very young, they're both draft picks just from not this past draft, but the one before. So obviously you have, Alexander Holtz and Dawson Mercer both in the pipeline. I'm just not sure if they're going to be NHL ready quite yet. I think it might be another a year for the both of them. And if they're not getting called up or playing at the NHL level or playing, Holtz might go back to Sweden for another year. Then you're looking at having, Tice Thompson. He's coming out of Providence College. He would probably be a call-up, if they lose a middle six winger or something like that. Thompson would probably be a call-up. AJ Greer has played some NHL games before. He's kind of a depth guy. He'd be a fourth liner at most. But again, if you lose somebody off the fourth line, or if you have a bunch of injuries, he's somebody that could certainly get a call-up. As is Chase DeLeo. Another guy who's, it would take some injuries for him to get into the NHL lineup, but as far as their depth chart goes, he probably would be on the call-up list. On defense, again, there's not a lot that I'm thinking is really knocking at the NHL door, but Riley Walsh, Colton White, and Kevin Ball are all on the chart there for the Devils' defense. And again, if you lose, maybe two, three defensemen to injury, then one of those guys is probably getting called up. Maybe a couple of those guys is getting called up. And then your third goaltender is Scott Wedgwood. He was there last year. Obviously, with the addition of Bernier, you're hoping that Wedgwood doesn't really have to play because you're going to have Blackwood and Bernier as your tandem, but he's the third goaltender. Again, a veteran guy who's been on that AHL, NHL line for a long time, has pretty much been a third goalie for a lot of his career and fits that role fine. So if anything were to happen to Blackwood or Bernier, Wedgwood would come in and fill a spot while they were out. And that's my projected roster. Again, I'm just throwing it out there, winging it, looking at the roster of who I think is going to make it. But things can obviously change in training camp. Things can change in the preseason. Maybe a young player has a really, really good preseason. All of a sudden, they've made the team out of camp, and that knocks somebody, that would have been on the roster off the roster and whatnot. It's definitely possible. It happens around the league every year, but based on with having training camps not started yet, looking at the names, looking at the roster, this is my projection for what it's going to look like come the beginning of the regular season, but obviously we'll find out. So New Jersey, very, very interesting team in my opinion. I did a video earlier in the offseason about them being one of the most interesting teams this year, and I think, they've got young pieces in place. They've got some really young building blocks that they're trying to build around. And now this offseason, they went out and they started to add the veteran pieces. They started to fill out the roster. They added the Dougie Hamiltons, the Tomas Tatars, the Ryan Graves, the Berniers. Like they're definitely trying to make that next step. They don't want to be a bottom 3 team in the league. They don't want to be a bottom 5 team in the league this year. They're trying to push at least into competing for a playoff spot. That doesn't mean they're going to make the playoffs. That doesn't mean they even expect to make the playoffs because they're in a pretty tough division. They probably don't. But they want to be competing for a playoff spot. They don't want their season to be over and have them be, 15, 20 points out of a playoff spot at the halfway mark. They want to be in the mix at least, and they're really trying to make that push for that next step. So they're going to be a really fun team to watch this year. I'm actually really excited to watch some Devils games and obviously stream some Devils games as well because I think they're going to be a fun young team, and I'm really excited to see how much better they are compared to where they were last year. But that is my season preview for the New Jersey Devils. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, our merch store, memberships, and donation links are down in the description as well. Thank you so much for watching. Really, really appreciate it. Please keep spreading the word about this channel, and we'll talk to you very, very soon.